This frigging door here, it still gives me nightmares. It was almost a month ago, and I was in Houston, Texas, outside this room, and we had a big workshop with our users, and they were all already in this room. And so I walk up to the door, and I grab the door handle and give it a pull to open, and it doesn't open. I've done the wrong thing, but it's fine. I meant to do that. It's okay. So I go back up and I give it a push. And disaster. It still doesn't open. At this point, it's made a noise. Everybody in the room has looked up, and they're looking at me, standing there helpless outside the door. And so I think, right, can't be locked. I'm meant to be in this meeting. I'm the one running this meeting, so I frantically grab my BP pass. I'm looking for the card reader somewhere to unlock this door and let me in, but there isn't one there. So I'm feeling very excluded, very self-conscious, and that I can't even do a simple thing like opening a bloody door. So at this point, one of our users sees me in distress, and she gets up out of her chair. She walks over to the door and slides it open for me to walk inside. And it really, made me feel like an absolute idiot who can't even do simple things. Has anybody here ever encountered a door a bit like this, where the signifier or the design of the door indicates a certain functionality that's actually the opposite of the way that the door even functions? Yeah, these are pretty common. They're so common, in fact, there's a name for them. They're called Norman doors, after a bloke called Don Norman, who wrote about these in his book called The Design of Everyday Things. And a Norman door is one where the signifier is the opposite of the affordance of the door. So in this case, it looks like you should probably pull this handle, but actually you're meant to slide it. And Norman doors are really common, and so is bad design. But I particularly like Don Norman because he tells us in his book that it wasn't my fault I couldn't open this door. It was the door's fault, obviously. And I'm here to tell you all, it's not our fault as users if there's digital or physical products that we can't use. It's the fault of the bad design. So why does bad design happen so often? Well, probably in this case, it can be really hard to design something if you don't know about the context it's going to be used in, and you don't know much about the users. Because the real world is very complicated, and human behavior is very unpredictable. To give another example, I think that the architectural design around Fornebu, around where we are now, is really fantastic. But you can see a lot of places where the behavior of the pedestrians is different from what the architect had in mind when they were planning all the paths. So these pedestrians, they aren't behaving, they aren't following the paved paths that were set out for them. And these are called desire paths. And they're one example of a user-centered evaluation where the users are telling us that the original design doesn't meet what their desire was. But I've noticed that in Fornebu, what they've been doing is that they've been putting gravel on top of these desire paths, and so making them more permanent. And this is a great example of responding directly to user feedback. And that's fantastic if you have the luxury to be able to do that. Before you're too far down a path, literally, you can then respond to the behavior of the users in this way and just adapt your design as you go. But this isn't always possible for us. We often have constraints. Thinking back to our door example, chances are the building manager here isn't going to just install a new door just because people like me are struggling. He'll say, no, Sam, you've been embarrassed once. Next time, just remember you have to slide this door, okay? But there's things we could do to improve it. So maybe you could put a sign on this door telling people that they're meant to slide it. And they weren't averse to putting signs on simple inanimate objects in this very building. You remember this one, Quentin. This was a sign on the staircase downstairs in the same building, or more of an instruction manual probably. But and this is probably overkill. But actually, I showed this to Adam, who's the tech lead on Discover, and he made a really good point. He said, "Well, Sam, probably when they were installing this staircase, they didn't have people glued to Instagram as they're walking up, and so when they designed this handrail, the context of the user behavior was maybe quite different," which I thought was a really good point. It's like, it's a really tough job designing things because the behavior is not just unpredictable, but it keeps changing. So coming back to the door again, you could put a sign on it like this saying slide. Maybe if there's an appetite for it, they might let us swap the handles for handles that more signify sliding. But chances are they're not going to just replace the door in response to user feedback. And actually, Norman himself says that just responding to user-centered evaluation is a really poor way of solving this problem of bad usability. Because if that's all you do, then you never address the design process that got you in this mess in the first place. So user-centered evaluation is absolutely a key part of a human-centered design process, or design thinking process, as Eric talked about. But it's only one part, and we have to continue to address the issues that got us in here, rather than just waiting to the last moment till we get feedback from the user to then swap out our doors, which would be a very wasteful way of going. So the process that Mr. Norman describes and advocates is this process of human-centered design, which gets drawn out in a lot of different ways, like Eric showed on one of his slides. I like this one, which is similar to the original way it was drawn in the international standard. It shows these steps in a circle that keeps repeating. And the steps start at the top here. For our Norman door, you'd begin, if you were being very human-centered, you'd begin by getting some empathy, as Eric said. You'd start by some observations of what is the room that this door is going to be for. Who are the types of people that are using this? It's a pretty busy meeting room. And then you'd understand the corridor outside and the hallway and these contextual things. Based on this understanding of the users and the environments, you'd then specify some user requirements. So in this case, we might want good visibility into the room. We might want it to not take up too much space, be big enough to let lots of people in and out in between meetings. And then once you'd specified these user requirements, we'd then go into a design process, looking to prototype as early as possible, because we know that we're probably not going to get it right the first time. So once you produce some designs, you then test it. It's never good practice to test your own designs, so this is my wife testing it. She doesn't typically struggle with opening doors, so she's maybe not our target user, but it's a good enough start. We can test with more people as we go. And then these dotted lines show that each time we test something with real users, we go back and not just update the design, but update our understanding of the users and the context, and update the user requirements as well. And this is something that we keep iterating and improving as we go. So what I really want to talk about is the reason why I was in Houston and why I was exposed to this door that caused me so many problems. I was there with the Discover team, and this was part of the human-centered design process that they've been following for a couple of years now. This was the latest user engagement that we had. And it was a very multidisciplinary team with a lot of different skills and perspectives. And that's great for a number of reasons. People coming together cross-functionally can improve empathy between the team. It can really improve problem solving. And this was a great collaboration as well between the team here in Norway and the team in North America. So we had here Kushal, the product manager. We had Ichi, who's our senior designer. We also had Nirvish, the customer success director, a number of senior stakeholders from BP as well. And there's a lot of domain expertise here as well, in terms of the actual domain that Discover is being used in. But inevitably, when you have people joining a product team or being employed by a company working on something, they very quickly get a type of Stockholm syndrome, which means that they stop being able to represent the users that maybe they used to be, and they start to represent the product. So it was essential that we also, as well as this core team here, had access to real users, in this case, drilling engineers and geologists who have actually been using the product for real as part of their work. And it's the responsibility of this team here to facilitate that process and create the right environment that we can really get the valuable insights from the real users, because that's what we're going to need to avoid having any more Norman doors creeping into our products. So this is the old school visualization of the human-centered design process. This comes from the International Standard on Human-Centered Design that was developed over a number of decades by an international committee that was chaired by my old boss, Tom Stewart. And it talks about the different steps of the human-centered design process that we need to go through. And it all starts off at the top here with planning the design process. So the team set these objectives, and these were set collaboratively between the product manager, the design lead, Konstantin, and the tech lead, Adam, and also the delivery team in North America were involved in setting these objectives, as well as the customer and other senior stakeholders at BP. So objectives were to observe how Discover is actually being used for real. And this was the first time that anybody from the product team got to see all their hard work being used for real by real people doing real tasks. I know that Deep, one of the front-end engineers, really came away from this with a very much improved perspective on how his work was making a difference to people's lives. We also wanted to specify some specific requirements for a particular user group, and then evaluate how it was being used and how it was being used alongside other products to see if there was any improvements we could make, if we could identify any unmet needs of the people using it, and then also to continue to improve our understanding of the user's tasks and their environment. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this, as we saw in the toolbox earlier. But typically at Cognite, the way that we specify our understanding of users is with personas. So a persona is an embodiment of the goals and motivations of a user group. So they're based on actual research with real users, and they're not a real person. They're a fictitious representation, and they're used to give empathy to the product team. So the product team doesn't fall into this trap of designing for ourselves, but instead we design for a particular persona. Like I say, not a real person, a fictitious embodiment. So if we were to make a persona for our door, it might be something a bit like this. Fictitious, that's right, Fran. But Sam's goals for the door would be that he wants to be able to just walk through this door without even being aware that he'd opened and even shut it. So hopefully then this is going to help our team of door makers to not be designing it for expert door users, but to be designing it for somebody a bit more limited when it comes to opening doors. And we had personas for Discover as well. So we had primary users and secondary users. Our main focus was these primary users. So this then helped us make sure that we were getting the right people in the rooms when we were doing our research. And we were focused on the drilling engineer and the well planning geologist. And the team has then gone back and updated these since they got the extra insights from the trip to Houston. But as well as understanding the users, the team also needed to understand the context in which this product is being used. And this is one of the methodologies we use to help us understand the context that Discover is being used as part of a larger well planning journey. And this is called desktop system mapping. It's also known as business origami. And it's an open source methodology, so you can download these cutouts here. And these cutouts represent different key people or locations and touch points. And it's the role of the facilitator then to allow the experts, so our drilling engineers and geologists, to then place these around on a table, and they can move them around really easily and quickly into an order that makes sense. And then they can reach a consensus as to what this complex system looks like, and then draw directly onto that any communication channels. They can add other notes to this, and then we used colored dots to then mark any points in the process that are just really annoying, or any that actually work quite well, or any areas where just some more research is needed. And so we very quickly got to an overview that these users agreed on of what this process was that they were trying to achieve, and how Discover and other products would fit into this. And I felt that we got further in this one morning session that we had than over several months of trying to do this remotely with one expert at a time, and then trying to go back to the next expert and gain consensus. Having this group activity like this over a shared artifact like this table and paper was really effective. And then the team have used this to then refine the user journey for Discover. So this shows not just the different functionality that's enabled within the product, but it also shows what the user is doing before, and then how they collaborate, and it gives some context for all the design of individual screens and isolated pieces of functionality that would be impossible to design unless you had this big picture and this high-level overview. So as well as the group session, the team also ran a number of one-to-one sessions with the users at their desks, so watching them doing the actual work that they would be doing on a typical day. So this is Itchy, the senior designer on Discover, with Hunter, one of the drilling engineers. And we used a method which is called rapid ethnography, or ethnographic observation, which is a bit different to task-based usability testing, which this team has also done before. So we wanted to be a bit more realistic. So rather than setting the user particular tasks and giving each user the same task, which we've done before, and which can be very, very effective, this one these sessions were led entirely by the user. So the user defined their own task that they were going to perform, and it was up to the facilitator to create the right environment for the users to be able to talk freely about their experience of the product, and also then to observe how they were using Discover. If we think back to our Norman door, it would actually be really easy to imagine a designer showing this to a user and saying, look at this door I've designed, it slides like this, why don't you give it a try and see how you get on? Which would be very counterproductive. And I think there's a place for selling a design, but I think that really user research is the opposite of selling, and you're looking for problems in the product. And so in these one-to-one sessions, it was also great to be able to see the workplace and how other products are being used alongside Discover. And the team got a lot more rich findings from these sessions than they had from doing remote sessions, which is what they'd had to do for the last couple of years before this. So because this process was driven by the user and we didn't know what exactly they were going to do in Discover, the team made a template like this before each of the sessions. I think this is a really fantastic example that other teams can learn from. So this template has the icebreaker questions that they asked to all the users, but then it has here the information architecture of Discover. So Discover has search and filters, it has a map, it then has some search results, and then different data visualization of the well data and collaboration functionality. So with this, Deep, who was the engineer who attended the sessions, was able to take notes and put them into the right place on Discover immediately. So it made the note-taking process a lot quicker, that they could then look and say, okay, all the comments that related to the map were here in this place. They also had this color coding, green for verbatim quotes, yellow for observations, blue for pain points, and orange for other insights, either from the user or from the note-taker. So they had almost a dozen of these. And then the next step was to analyze this data. So they used this process which is called affinity mapping, where they took all the notes from this dozen users and they started to move them about, so grouping the findings that were similar until these themes emerged. And they kept going until they had the smallest manageable number of themes. And these are issues that the users have experienced. So if we zoom in to one issue that a lot of users had, this example here was about a particular data visualization, this MPT data. And these users were expecting Discover to be a tool for collaboration. And they wanted to be able to collaborate by putting this visualization they'd found into a presentation, which wasn't functionality that was available. So this is a bit like a Norman door within the product, that the way it works doesn't match their desire. So it was important to capture this as a finding, not jump immediately to a solution for how to resolve this. So the team took all the findings and they listed them out in this massive list. This was a collaboration, not just with the Discover team, but 4 different teams at Cognite. Javier, I think, yes, you are very familiar with this. A lot of findings, and then deciding what the next action should be. Not necessarily in Discover, and a lot of them actually would decide not to take an action. If we look for one example, for this same NPT data, the action here is to give this ability to hide and show the table content, and the designers have said what the design might be, but this will then go into a design phase where different alternatives will be explored, and also the ability to open an individual object in a modal window. This is new functionality. But overall, from all of these actions, they're pretty well aligned with the roadmap, which is a very positive finding from this. Then we have here Eric's favorite tool, which is this prioritization matrix, where then the product team, so the product manager Kushal, the design lead Konstantin, and the tech lead Adam, then prioritized how they were going to address these next actions that they'd identified on this matrix with value and effort. So to summarize the process, it was the same one that we followed for the door. It started off by observing the user's tasks and environment, making sure we had a good understanding that was specified and shared across not just the product team, but the wider team at Cognite and at the customer. Based on this understanding, then producing and specifying a number of user requirements, then going into a design phase to produce design solutions to meet the requirements, and then testing with users. And each time we test, we update our understanding, we update the requirements, and we update the product and the designs. So if we had some principles that would let us know that we're being user-centered, it would be that our design has to be based on an explicit understanding of users' tasks and environments. This is where our personas and our user journey comes in. The users have to be involved throughout design and development. This is the key part of being human-centered, is that the real users need to be involved, and it's not just enough to have that domain knowledge within the product team, because the context is always changing. The process is driven and refined by user-centered evaluation. And also the team needs to have enough time and capacity to then be able to respond to those evaluations as they come in, and be able to adjust the roadmap as necessary as we get new insights. Human-centered design addresses the whole user experience, so not just what the user sees on the screen, but considering the onboarding process, considering training, and considering help and support. These other factors are a very key part of human-centered design. And then lastly, the team has to include multidisciplinary skills and perspectives, and everybody on the team needs to be involved in these activities. I think that was one of the really fantastic things to see from the trip to Houston, was how it wasn't just the designers, it was engineers, product manager, other stakeholders at BP and in the delivery team that were very actively involved in everything that we did. I should just say as well, it's human-centered design is exactly the same as user-centered design. The name was changed in the last iteration of the standard to reflect the fact that it's not just users that are affected, there's other stakeholders that we need to consider, and also considering the wider context, the company strategy. But as long as we're following these principles, then we are practicing human-centered design. So if we follow these steps, we end up having better designed products, fewer Norman doors appearing within our products, and we stop making any new Norman doors. Because believe me, the world already has enough Norman doors. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fun. I just want to give kudos to Sam for the storytelling because that's really important. We do have one more presenter, but before I bring him up, there is time for a question or two. We have one from Elka online first. It says, great presentation, Sam. I wonder if we could do a similar process to analyze API design and backend solutions.
Yes, 100%. We have those principles and we have the steps.
Yeah,
absolutely. We can
and
do.
some templates, which is really great. Do you have any questions from the crowd for Sam? Can Sam open a door? We should watch him later.
It's iterative. You just keep improving.
Mostly push and pull doors, I think.
I managed to get into this room, all right.
I made sure he was here early just in case. Sorry. Yes, right here.
Yeah, it's usually in this process in which we're covering the tree. Thank you. We have found that sometimes we need to change users or personas or humans. Is that often happening? Is that dramatic, or should we avoid that? Or
so there's probably a few elements to that, Javier. So changing users, that maybe relates to the Stockholm syndrome that comes in. If it's the same participants involved, you need to keep reaching out to more people. I can't just test the prototype door of my wife. I'll need to test it with other people as well. But then I think you said updating the personas, and then the personas are going to change. We'll find new personas. Absolutely key part of it.
not a catastrophe.
Completely. No, it's an essential part. Like for Discover, they had the primary users and the secondary users, and that's changed over the last year. So continue to change.
Yeah, because we originally have a hesitation to do it. It's like, oh, did we make a mistake? Is this not? I mean, is the maturity not going as far as we want it to be? And is that bad that we want to just?
No, it's fantastic.
Take a middle step?
It's fantastic because it shows that you're learning, and it shows that our understanding is improving. And there'll be fewer Norman doors.
Really quick, I'm going to give you the note that you need to go put your mic on. And then, Damian, don't forget to mic up. Get your Brittany. And we have time for one more question. Yes?
Mina.
So if we take Discovery as an example, how do you make sure that BP's users' biasness doesn't affect the product as you're going to be trying to get this product to other users? So what's the right balance between number of users from one company versus fewer users from multiple companies?
Yeah, very good question. And that's just by continuing to go around the process with more users. So this particular visit was with one particular user group, and that's what we learn about. We learn about those users. But then hopefully there's learnings that extrapolates to other companies, but then we need to keep testing with other companies and other users as well. But very good point.
Javier's going to jump out of his seat. What?
Sorry, it's because that is close to my heart. It's because that was the first challenge of Discover backend, which is what we provide. And as we started expanding, we started seeing that people wanted to use it in a different way. And we tried to say, yeah, of course we want that. But then that brings a backend problem, right? And then trying to find that balance between how to make that backend be flexible enough and not having to commit too much into the front end is basically our challenge today, at least the way I feel it, right? So we need to find out. We will see. I guess the question is when is too much hard?
So guys, we are going to move on, but first, another big hand for our door opener, Sam.